Hello, and welcome back to the 40th installment of Reconciling Zero as we go in search of Effective Zen. The question we posed in the last episode was, what is Zen? Recall that as part of our quest to answer the question, is this Zen Mountain? We are examining the very nature of both Buddhism and Zen. So what is Zen? Before proceeding, this may be a good time for a quick summary of a few of the topics we've covered so far. First, recall that from an awareness standpoint, as humans, we instinctively slice up our awareness of reality into objects. And while this makes many parts of our lives much easier, with this slicing, we often falsely attribute certain characteristics to these objects. And two of the more problematic characteristics are the notions of permanence and an intrinsic nature. The alternative to a world of objects is that of interpreting reality as the interaction of activities. And in interpreting reality as activity, the Zen master Joshu Sasaki taught that all activity can be understood as a manifestation of zero, the inevitable cycling between what we might consider a potential activity and actual activity. Sasaki summed up zero this way, quote, "Zero inevitably splits into naturally opposing activities, often called plus and minus or expand and contract, which inevitably, eventually cancel each other and disappear, resulting in the return to zero." End quote. Now, in recognizing both Buddhism and Zen as activities, as spiritual activities, we define spirituality as the set of all activities intended in the pursuit of the highest good, where the highest good is understood as that activity done for its own sake. As such, we can see that spiritual activities are not accidental. That is, they must be intended and must have a goal, the highest good. Buddhism, then, is the set of spiritual activities where the highest good is the realization of non-duality. And another way of expressing this might be to say that Buddhism is the set of spiritual activities where the highest good is the realization of infinite mind. Now, approaching the activity of Buddhism as a manifestation of zero, it is appropriate to view it as consisting of four aspects. The first aspect of Buddhist activity is the notion of zero-buddhism, the confluence of three requisite conditions necessary for the activity of Buddhism to inevitably arise. These three requirements are an enlightened teacher, a clear picture of the path to infinite mind, and an understanding of the obstacles expected along this path. The second aspect of Buddhist activity is the notion of triggering, those circumstances that initiate the split of zero-Buddhism into the two naturally opposing activities that make up the activity of Buddhism. The third aspect of Buddhist activity is the actual activity of Buddhism, walking the path, perhaps introspecting, perhaps sutra reading, perhaps listening to a teacher's lecture. We might call the last of the four aspects of Buddhist activity cancellation, that moment when the activity of Buddhism inevitably disappears and one returns to the activity of zero-Buddhism, that moment when we stop walking the Buddhist path. And with all this, we can now define Zen as the set of Buddhist activities where the path to the realization of infinite mind demands generous helpings of both zazen and something we might call engagement. Okay, now given that Zen is an activity and consequently a manifestation of zero, we can examine the same four aspects of activity as they apply to Zen. The first aspect of Zen activity is called zero-Zen, the confluence of requisite conditions necessary for the activity of Zen to arise. And here we want to identify these conditions. As with Buddhism, there are three. Like traditional Buddhism, the first requirement is an enlightened teacher. Again, like Buddhism, the second requirement is a clear picture of the path to the realization of infinite mind. But most importantly, a path requiring both engagement and zazen. The third requirement is a clear picture of the obstacles expected along the path. Now, the second aspect of Zen activity is the notion of triggering, those circumstances that initiate the split of zero-Zen into the naturally opposing activities that make up the activity of Zen. And the beauty of Zen is that, unlike traditional Buddhism, this trigger is no longer random. Because of the condition of engagement, the transition to the activity of Zen is very often thrust upon us by our teachers. The third aspect of Zen activity, the actual activity of Zen, most prominently manifests either as the activity of engagement or that of zazen. Finally, the last of the four aspects of Zen activity is cancellation. That moment when the activity of Zen inevitably disappears and returns to the activity of zero-Zen. After cancellation, we are no longer manifesting the activity of Zen, no longer engaged, or perhaps no longer sitting. So that's it for our recap. We did identify a couple additional requirements of a Zen path, that of engagement and zazen. So for next episode, we pose the question, what is engagement? And until next episode, cheers!